How does the Miami Hurricanes quarterback room stack up? Carson Beck, does he have the tools to solidify Miami as a contender? Who's going to be his backup? Let's break it all down with a former Miami Hurricanes QB1.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this episode, we'll talk about why the defense was so bad last year and if those things can be fixed with all these new players and a lot of new defensive coaches and assistants. We'll talk about all the young receivers who will be asked to step up for Miami in 2025. But naturally, given who's joining us today, you know we got to start with the quarterbacks. We've got former Miami QB1 with us, also a former co-host of mine on Canes Radio postgames. Malik Rosier is with us. Malik, how are you, my friend? And I know we're a few days away from spring football. Do you smell the scent of college football in the air?
I do. It's definitely it's funny. Usually, I feel like the gap between like the final game to spring ball is so long. I don't know if it's just me getting older. I don't know what's going on, but I felt like that gap has definitely gotten faster. And I also think just because a lot of the off-season stuff, I know there's been a ton of stuff with, tampering and NIL and all that other stuff. So I felt like all the new news coming out, it definitely kept me tapped into college football. So it actually feels like there hasn't really been a break. Obviously, games have been missing, but at least from things going on, changes in college football have definitely been a lot going on.
I'm with you. It's a lot more like the NFL now. There's never a true off season. There's always something to talk about. And Miami's biggest off-season acquisition, Malik, is former Georgia starting quarterback Carson Beck. I know you're very familiar with the Georgia program, having worked over there for a little bit, although not with Beck, but I'm sure you've evaluated Carson Beck. I would love your takeaways if you want to start with the positives, and then we can get into the question marks. But your evaluation on Carson Beck, who's 24-3 as a starter, and he brings his talents and his Lamborghini, which I hope they recover, brings all that down to Coral Gables.
That's funny. Yeah, so, the year I was at Georgia, Carson was actually a freshman. So I was around Carson for a little bit. Very, very polished, works with, I'm 90% sure, 6 Points in Jacksonville, which trains guys like Anthony Richardson. So, has been around some guys that's obviously talented, at least from the quarterback standpoint, on a fundamental side. So, right, so you're going to see the guy, he's going to be fundamentally sound. He's going to have his feet where he needs to go, right? He doesn't have a ton of mechanical issues. Now, I do think with him coming off the surgery, I don't necessarily think he'll have mechanical issues, but I think that, there's going to be some stuff that's obviously going to feel a little bit different, right? So kind of how fast does he bounce back from that injury is always going to be a question. But, obviously Vinny and the gang with Dr. Cap, I know they're going to do a good job of helping him recover. So I do expect him, obviously if he does start, to have a good year. But I think the biggest thing that he brings is, leadership. Again, that was one thing that we heard a lot from Cam. Obviously with Carson being at Georgia, having 2 national championships, kind of seeing, hey, that was the big thing when I was there, right? So when I was there was JT and then there was Stetson, right? And to me, there wasn't a huge, and obviously they had their differences, but there wasn't really, to me, a big difference between JT and Stetson besides kind of their leadership style. So I'll kind of explain it JT had a leadership style where it was okay, I need to basically yell at guys, tell guys, if you make a mistake, he's just going to yell at you. But the difference was JT was also one of the first people in the building, one of the last people out, right? So when he yelled at you, it wasn't out of a position where he's just mad at you. It's you knew all the work he put into it, right? He's trying to execute whenever he's in. Stetson, whether he hit you in the face and you dropped it, would be that's on me. That's my bad, right? I got to throw a better ball. Right. So it made the guys around him feel even if I make a mistake, right? And I know it's my fault, right? I'm not going to get chewed out kind of like the same way as like, you know, kind of how the coaches chew out the kids, right? You're already getting chewed out by the coaches as is, right? I don't want to have my quarterback, you know, on my butt as well. And so I think that's kind of some of the leadership stuff that he's kind of seen right now. Again, they're like I've kind of said, like there's guys that you have to yell at, right? Like Daryl Langham was a guy that I would yell at. Amon Richards was a guy I didn't have to yell at, right? So kind of seeing those dynamics, I think, between being a backup and obviously having his years of starting is something that is very unique. And that's one thing that I always tell, you know, young quarterbacks is kind of, you know, your communication skills, right? You always say it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? Kind of learn that side. And I think that's something that Carson has been around for a while. He's seen different leadership styles, and obviously he's had his chance to kind of lead himself, right? So I am interested kind of how he leads, because again, the Miami locker room is a little different from Georgia. I will say that there were a decent amount of Miami kids that were at Georgia. So it won't feel too crazy of a difference, because, you know, Georgia does a good job of recruiting South Florida kids. But obviously the Miami locker room is a little bit different. You know, one thing I'll say too is like the practices are different, right? So Georgia practices in the afternoon. Miami, we practice at 7 a.m. So you're up at 5:30. Right. So those kind of adjustments, they're not big, but they're small things that, again, he has to adjust to. And I think he'll be fine. But kind of how fast does that happen is things that you always wonder with, you know, new quarterbacks. But again, the good news is he's been playing football for a while. He's been successful. So I don't really expect there to be like a huge drop off with him.
I love to hear that. And by the way, that's a great breakdown with insight from someone. I didn't realize you had an overlap with Beck at Georgia. So that's good to know
Rookie
that you got
year.
to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was funny. I had him and Stetson Bennett, which was funny. Him and Stetson were actually the scout team quarterbacks for a while.
Oh, wow.
Because he was a freshman, right?
Yeah, sure.
They had Stetson, Jamie Newman, JT Daniels, and DeJuan Mathis. And then they had Carson, who was like the freshman coming. So they had 4 guys, right? I think they had 2 transfers. They had JT from USC, and then they had Jamie Newman that came from Wake. So Carson was kind of like, you know, just freshman on the block trying to figure out where things go. So they had him with scouts. He did a great job, right? I saw him a lot. But it's just funny kind of see him then and now, and how things have definitely changed from, you know, me at Miami going to Georgia, and him at Georgia coming to Miami. So it's funny how that works.
I mean, what do you think is his upside in Shannon Dawson's offense, just in terms of the mechanics and the fit?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that Dawson has a lot of options, right? And I always say, and again, he can run, but he's not obviously the biggest mobile guy. It'll be a lot different than what we saw with Cam. But, you know, just how can I put, like, being around Brad, right? Like, I always felt like Brad always produced better when you gave him 4 options, 5 options, right? Let him think. He's a cerebral guy, right? It kind of damages him whenever you're going, you know, I formation, play action pass, and he's losing 2 guys, only has 2 or 3 guys in the route, and he can't move, right? So it's like, if they cover 3 of the routes, I'm done, right? But when you get 4 or 5 guys out in the routes, now I understand where my hots are. Now I understand where my checkdowns, right? Now you're putting, you know, linebackers in level routes, right? So like when you talk about plays like star, which is just simple corner, hitch route, flat, right? But if you don't have the flat route, well, nothing's holding anything to not, you know, get underneath your hitch or your corner. So it's like small things like that, again, you can run it and you can add more protection. It's doable. But the difference is in the offense like Dawson's, there's a lot of options. A lot of guys are getting out. And it allows quarterbacks to kind of have that free range. And I always feel like if you want to go to the NFL, that's definitely how they run their offenses. And I think that's a unique aspect that, you know, Dawson has, that to me, if you're trying to be an NFL quarterback, if you're someone that, you know, wants to actually take over an offense, right? Because we saw Cam last year checking plays left and right. Now, again, I don't know if, you know, Dawson's going to allow Carson to have the same leeway to check in and out of plays as much. But again, as a quarterback, as someone that, you know, you should study film just as much as your OC, right? You should want an offense that's very flexible, that allows you to kind of determine what happens, right? Because there's going to be routes the same way that, like, you know, maybe Cam's best route was a fade. Maybe Carson's best route's a slant, right? That's stuff that you got to understand when it's man beaters, right? What does my quarterback like to do? And for the most part, if you give him rain, he's going to say, hey, I know I'm better at slants than fade. That's what I'm going to throw. Right, so there's things like that I think will really help Carson. That'll be a little different, you know, from the offense that he ran with Bobo, obviously, to Coach Dawson's offense at Miami.
And I always learn something when Malik Rosier is on. And when we come back, I want to break down the backups. We're going to see a lot of these guys in spring with Beck not being fully recovered yet. So from Emory Williams, Judd Anderson, Luke Nickel, who's going to be that second string quarterback? You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Guys, the future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happen under the table. Fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes that they love. Now, with Roy, you get to be part of the change and support Miami Hurricanes athletes in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide exactly how much to contribute, and receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's risk-free, and it's a great way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app now from the App Store and start backing Miami athletes the way they deserve with transparency, trust, and real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I take you through the conference, basketball, football, lawsuits, conference realignment rumors. Locked On ACC is available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. We got former Miami quarterback one, Malik Rosier, with us. You know, Malik, I know you've worked out with Emory Williams before. And he's in, I guess, kind of an awkward spot now with Miami having brought Carson Beck in. So, he's not going to be the starter in 2025, certainly. He's also got a guy like Luke Nickel now as a true freshman breathing down his neck. Talk a little bit about Emory, especially, and I know that he didn't have, a great outing in the second half of the Pop-Tarts Bowl, but you know him better than most. Was that uncharacteristic, and how can Emory Williams bounce back from that?
Yeah, I think that one of the unique parts about playing quarterback, right, is that, obviously everyone praises you whenever you're doing great, and obviously everyone points out things whenever you're doing wrong, right? So I always say you can't, let the highs be high and let the lows be lows, right? Like people have bad games, right? Like whether you talk about Tom Brady or anybody, like there's bad games, especially from someone as young as him, right? I think he's under 21, maybe 22, right? So still a young kid when you talk about how long some people play quarterback. But again, I think the biggest thing is how's his support group, right? Whether it's his family, his friends, right? Like how is him and Dawson's communication? Because I think that's an important, aspect, whether he stays or, winds up leaving, which I hope that he winds up staying. Because again, I think at the end of the day, competition, that's what you want, whether you want to be a college quarterback, an NFL quarterback, right? There's going to be competitions where it's like, okay, like I want to leave and go somewhere else. Well, maybe in 2 years, right? Maybe you're competing versus Carson or Luke in the NFL in one of these places, right? So you don't know who you're going to wind up competing versus. So I think that's one thing that I at least really like about Emory is that he doesn't shy away from competition. He definitely embraces that side, which is, obviously a unique character trait for a lot of young guys nowadays. I feel like most kids run away from competition. I think that's one of the reasons why the staff personally likes him a lot. You know what I mean? There aren't many kids that would stick around saying, hey, I have, a guy that, was playing for the college playoffs coming in. I have a, Mr. Georgia coming in behind me as a freshman, right? And then you have Darian Coleman, who's a, really good coming in behind him, right? And a lot of guys would be like, man, I see kind of all my replacements coming. I'm going to leave. But it's like other guys are like, I see this other chance for me to grow, get better, compete, right? Learn what I can get better at. Like it was kind of the same situation I was in to a sense where it's like, not really, I won't say it's harsh, but Rick basically walked up to me and was like, hey man, like you need to leave. And it was like, I don't want to necessarily say Dawson said that, but whenever you bring a guy like Carson in, it's kind of like, hey, like we're finding your replacement to a sense, right? And I think he kind of has that situation where it's like I can either leave and find a better spot, or I can at least try to address the issues that they see. Like, what am I doing wrong, right? There's a lot of stuff for me where it was like, I would just try to make too many plays. Like hitting a check down was okay, right? Just checking into a run play was okay. Getting a 2-yard run if the play's not there is okay, right? There was things that I had to work on, and again, everyone's different, right? But it's like, what does Emory need to work on? Because again, even though he would, let's say he does transfer from Miami to wherever, the issues that were at Miami doesn't necessarily mean when you transfer somewhere else isn't still going to pop up, right? So that's kind of the reason why I think that I don't want to say that he'll be the starter, but I think that he'll at least do some good pushes. I think he'll obviously have a better spring. Hopefully, he'll have a better spring, and again, I think it's something that will be interesting to see after the spring, kind of where he's at, where Luke's at. Right, Luke's definitely an athletic young guy. But I do think there's some stuff where just the competitive nature of Emory is what I'm very interested in. It's kind of, hey, do you get better? Because again, some people they need kind of that failure part to get better. Other guys, they don't know how to react. Once they fail, they kind of shut down and close in. So I'm very interested to see kind of how he responds going into the spring.
Well, one guy who hasn't seemed to experience any failure to this point is Luke Nickel, because this kid wins everything. Malik, I mean, 2 consecutive state championships. I mean, what was like a 20 or a 21 game winning streak he ended his high school career on. Every time he partook in a 7-on-7 tournament, he was winning his 7-on-7. So Luke Nickel was cleaning up at the high school level. I know you've had a chance to evaluate him a little bit, because I've seen you make X posts, formerly Twitter posts, about Luke Nickel. What can fans expect that he's bringing to the table now as a true freshman?
Yeah, I think one, he's really smart, definitely understands the game of football. We were just talking about like small things, right? Like ball placement, right? Level throws, kind of where your eyes need to be, right? Just very small things, and he was very on top of it. And again, that was stuff like I even told him, like, stuff that I'm like teaching you is stuff that I didn't really understand or realize until I was like, a sophomore, junior, kind of going into college, right? And so there's a lot of stuff on that side that I definitely think, he's been around the right guys. Whether it was football, obviously Milton did a good job of coaching him up in some different aspects. So I don't necessarily want to say that he's like ready to play now, but I think there's a lot of things when you talk about what you have to teach a young quarterback that you don't necessarily have to teach him, right? Sometimes you have to not only teach a guy offense, but not even teach him a whole defensive playbook, right? You teach him what, 3 fire zone, 3 void zone, one rat, lurk, all these coverages, right? For the most part, I think Luke has a good grasp of that. So now it's like, okay, now how much of the offense can we teach him, right? Because I always say it doesn't matter if you know what the offense, what your offense is doing, if you can't understand what your offense is supposed to do versus the defense. So I think there's a lot of things that for him, it's more learning Dawson's offense. Because I know when I first got there, right, I had to learn Coley's offense. Plus, I had to understand what all these new defensive coverages was, right? Because really, the only 2 coverages I knew coming in was 3: cover 1, cover 3, cover 2, right? But in college, there's like 30, 40, 50 coverages, right? And again, I don't know all of them, but I know me and Luke have taught some, and there's a good group of them that he knows, right? So again, that to me is a lot of things that it's like, okay, where you're a lot of steps ahead of where I was, right? And that's a really good thing when you talk about, again, for the most part, teams don't run a crazy amount of coverages. So it really allows the coaches to be able to kind of teach them the offense. Because again, for my situation, like I was learning both offense and defense. So it was like too much for me to even think about kind of competing, right? If I can kind of understand what the defense is running, then it kind of really helps me function on my side of the offense. So I think there's a lot of things that are positive about what Luke can do.
When push comes to shove, assuming Emory Williams stays, past the spring, do you think Emory will end up being the backup quarterback behind Beck? I feel that way because I know everyone's excited about Luke, but I think redshirting Luke would be the best path to preserve the year of eligibility. I'm also intrigued by Judd Anderson. I'm a big fan. I don't, he obviously has an experience disadvantage compared to Emory Williams. So I'm going to assume Emory Williams is probably the favorite to be QB2.
Yeah, I think that'll be a very interesting decision, because I think that as much as you're trying to, and I don't want to say like appease Emory, because obviously I think that he's done a lot. Again, he's a competitor. A lot of the team likes him, right? So I think when you talk about that side, yes, he should be QB2. But then again, is it one of those things? And this is, again, I love Emory. I like Judd. I like Luke. Like all 3 of those guys are in quarterback country. But as like a quarterback from like an OC standpoint, it's like, okay, like it is almost like dealing with emotions, right? Because it's different if it goes, Carson, Emory, Judd, Luke, right? Well, that's order when you got in. It looks a lot different if it was like Carson, Luke, Judd, Emory, right? Now, how do you manage the bottom 2 with the rookie jumping them? and saying, okay, well, this is why he's ahead of you, even though you guys know more and you have planes. So that's kind of where it's always interesting on those dynamics. I'm not going to say who. When I was at, UGA, there was definitely coaches that would like give guys second string reps just so that the kids wouldn't transfer, just to make them feel like, hey, like I'm the second string guy, even though the coaches knew, nah, we really like this kid here, but we need you. Whether a guy gets hurt, right? We need you to fill in on like special teams. Again, that was a skill player, right? But again, that's the same thing with quarterbacks, where it's like, hey, we know that we're kind of way I felt with Nkosi, where it's like the coaches are like, hey, we're just waiting for Nkosi to get better, right? We're just going to kind of have you here, and that's the one thing that I'm always interested in. Kind of, again, that's why I said earlier, like the communication between Dawson and Emory is so important. Because that side is what really keeps guys from just staying or kind of going, is kind of the connection they feel with their coach. And again, I think Dawson's definitely a straight shooter. I don't think he's lying to Emory in any way. But again, that communication side on does Emory feel comfortable staying, or is like, hey man, like I feel like you guys like Judd better or Luke better. I need to go find a situation where I'm kind of their guy, right? And again, that's going to be kind of how Dawson portrays the situation, how he communicates it.
I'd like your take, as a quarterback, what it's going to be like for Miami to have to replace so many of their pass catchers from last year. I mean, their top five receivers have all moved on, whether to the NFL, hopefully, or to another program. One of them. I mean, Miami has to replace Xavier Restrepo, Jacoby George, Isaiah Horton, Sam Brown, Elijah Arroyo, who was one of the top tight ends in the country last year. And a lot of the players that they are replacing these guys with have limited experience. C.J. Daniels, who's transferring in, is one of the exceptions. He's a senior, but we're going to be looking to guys like JoJo Trader, Ray Joseph, Nye Carr, Elijah Lofton to fill a lot of these roles. What can they do, from the quarterbacks working out with these guys to the coaches during spring? How can that transition go, Malik, when Miami lost so many of their top pass catchers from last year?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with Miami, one, kind of talk about the leadership skill of Carson, right? When you talk about young receivers, they're gonna make great plays. They're also probably gonna have a play where maybe they bust her out. They might have a play where maybe they drop a ball, right? And kind of your leadership skills to kind of pull those guys out of situations is gonna help. I also think the fact that we have a really good offensive line, and obviously there's guys like Mark Fletcher. The run game definitely helps. Kind of take some relief off of these young guys, saying, "Hey, I don't have to." Catch every pass, because again, there's going to be probably half the plays are going to be run plays, right? So again, it's more about doing your job, which is why I said, in the bowl game, I was happy that some of those young guys got experience with Cam, right? The fact they got that experience with Cam, it kind of intensifies your sense of urgency, right? Your sense of attention to detail, right? Because Cam's like, he's on it, right? He's saying, hey, you got to be here by this moment, right? And it makes those guys kind of understand, hey, this is how I'm supposed to operate, right? And I'll be honest with you, when I was the backup compared to the starter, my intensity changed, right? And that was one thing that, I'm kind of glad we have a guy like Carson, to a sense, because he understands the type of intensity, right, that it needs to be successful, right? It's also about like not slacking off, not even for 1 second at practice, right? As soon as you leave practice, you can do what you want, right? But at practice, right, one of the biggest goals of the quarterback is keeping everybody locked in, right? Whether it's young, old, first string, second string, right? Is keeping those guys to understand, hey man, it's funny now on the sideline, but what if he gets hurt and you're in, and you ain't locked in all practice, right? And that's just stuff that, again, that I think that these young guys really have to understand. I think they will be locked in, but again, it's the attention to detail, it's the overwatching film, right? It's small things like that that really helps young guys grow and understand, okay, like when I see this, I know I'm supposed to do that, right? Because the way that Dawson's offense works, right, for most part, it's option routes, especially for the slot guys. Right, they have two-way goes. So if you don't know what coverage you're seeing and you're not on page with the quarterback because you're not watching film or studying, well, you're probably not going to be starting. Right, so there's things like that that I definitely know that these young guys are, I don't want to have to pick it up, but definitely need to understand. Like, if you want to be good in an offense like Dawson, which you can be, right, your attention to detail, like your understanding of coverage, which is one reason why Xavier Restrepo killed everybody. Right, it had nothing to do with him being 6'4", run to 4'4". Right, he had attention to detail. He ran good routes and he understood coverage, right? He got open, right? And that's the kind of offense that I think is very friendly to a lot of guys. But again, I just know for a fact that there are option routes in Dawson's offense. And when you have young guys that sometimes don't necessarily study as much, you have to take some of those options route out, right? And hey, instead of me giving him an out, a hitch, or a lookie, right, on this play because he's a young guy. Now it's just a speed out, right? So I take in two options, right? I'm still giving him a route, right? But I'm taking options out that in the past I had because, again, I had a guy saying, hey, if he blitzes right now, you're just going to run a lookie and you're going to replace him. Hey, if that guy expands too much, instead of running a speed out, you're just going to run a hitch and turn around and find grass in between, right? But guys have to know kind of what they're seeing and where they're going so that they're on the same page with the quarterback, right? Sometimes with young receivers, that's just a lot harder, right? So I'm interested in kind of how some of those option routes in Dawson's offense change for some of those young guys to kind of make it simpler, make them play faster, right, and give the quarterback more of a clear picture of where they're going to go, right? Because, again, based on what he sees, the receiver is going to run something different. And if he's on one page and you're on another, right, that's where you get interceptions, right, miscues, things like that wind up happening because guys are on different pages. And, again, sometimes it can be the quarterback's fault. Sometimes it's the receiver's fault. But I always say at the end of the day, it always falls on the quarterback. It does.
Well, right.
It's on the quarterback. So that's kind of where it's like I'm interested to see does he cut off some of those with, again, the new quarterback. You got some young guys at the receiver, young guys at quarterback coming in, right? Does he cut off some of those option routes with some of the youth that he has on his team?
Coming up next, how quickly can Corey Hetherman turn around Miami's defense? You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day, you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You can be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. As a parent, I want to make sure my family is financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives me that peace of mind. You can get $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. So protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Yeah, a Locked On Canes insider asked me the other day, there's Malik. I lost him for a second. Here he is. I was asked the other day, like, hey, can you come up with any examples of a new defensive coordinator turning around a defense in 1 year? Well, Miami just hired the example of that. I mean, that's literally what Corey Hetherman did last year. Took over a Minnesota defense that had been 70th in the country, got them into the top 5. I'll also point out that Manny Diaz's first year as defensive coordinator at Miami. Malik, I looked up the numbers. Miami, before Diaz came in with Richt, they gave up around 28 points per game. He got it down to about 18 points per game in his first year for points allowed. So there are examples of DCs turning things around quickly. What needs to happen from Corey Hetherman and all those new staff members for Miami to do just that this year?
Well, one, which is obviously hard, but I think he's at least understands that, especially when we talk about the change that he had at Minnesota, is understanding your players, right? Like as much as, I like the last DC and everything, like personality wise, right? Whenever you have Tyler Barron in the flats trying to cover a running back, that's not necessarily his strong suit. Now, again, I kind of understand it, right? Whenever you watch like the Alabamas, the Georgias, right? That's the type of defense they run. But again, when I was at Georgia, they had guys like Nolan. Well, Nolan's running a 4.40. Nolan's running with running backs. You know what I mean? So if he needs to cover the flats and you bring a guy out there, well, good luck because this guy's going to run right with him. So that was kind of the difference where it's like, I understand why you're trying to run it, but for our personnel grouping, it just didn't work. Right. I also felt like there was times to where like you just got to get out of man. Right. They're running man beaters. They're picking your guys. They're rubbing your guys. They're getting your linebackers in bad leverage. Well, just zone them up. Say, hey, run your man. Right. Mix man and zone. Right. Give guys confusion where it's not like every time we go single high, it's single high man. Right. And that was some stuff where it's like as as much as I understand that, yes, we are a man team, right? Same reason why Florida State plays a lot of man. They're a man team. You got to run zone. If guys are picking your guys and they have a good scheme for you, you got to adjust. You can't just sit there and probably yell at your guys and say, hey, you guys got to do better on the pick. No, just run zone. Let them pick and rub, and your guys are going to be sitting right there for the pick and rub. So, again, I think that that's kind of what I want to see is, hey, the same way, right, as we're on Dawson. I don't say on Dawson. We're talking about Dawson, right? Got to use his personnel groupings, right? Got to use certain players. The same thing with the defensive side, right? I feel like last year, as much as, yes, our guys didn't make plays, but there's also plenty of plays where guys were in the wrong position, and not even from like they're busting a coverage, just like that's not one of your upsides of you playing DN or linebacker or whatever position they were kind of in. So to me, I think that's the biggest thing I want to see is kind of, how does he use guys like Bain, right? Does he get creative with how he's using Bain? I felt like people last year, to be honest with you, kind of neutralized Bain compared to his freshman year. So it's like, how does he get creative with Bain and different guys like that are playmakers that, can make a difference. So I think it's going to be interesting. I do know at least like there's a good wave of young talent that's coming in. And one thing that's at least good, right, is on the defensive side, when you have young talent, it usually stays simple, right? So again, right, cover 3 and cover 1 look the same and are very simple to teach, right? So those are coverages that you can teach. Cover 2 is very simple. You can run that since Pop Warner, right? So there's coverages that you can still teach these young guys. That's like, hey, we can change coverage, but also stay simple, right? So that's kind of what I want to see is, hey, because that was one thing, to be honest, that Manny did. When Manny first got there, like when we had D'Onofrio was too confusing for the guys, right? So like when I remember talking to Dallas Crawford, his biggest thing was that D'Onofrio wasn't wrong about his checks. The problem was every play there was always 6 or 7 checks. So if there was a motion or a shift or the tight in the back one side, or they went to quad or they went on back, like it was every play had a different check, right? So it was too much for the guys to kind of all be on the same page. Where with Diaz, he's like, hey, we're going to cover one man, we're going to lock everything up, and we're going to be the best man team we can be. Right. And then again, he started adding over time. He would add zone blitzes, right? He would add cover 3. He had like his own little 2 invert, right? So he added stuff over time. But again, he kept it simple. He let guys play fast. But again, he had his kind of zone counters, right? He'd go cover 1, all of a sudden pop you with a cover 3, and guys are belling, and you're trying to throw a fade thinking that it's man press, right? So again, it's being simple, but also allowing your guys to play fast. And again, you can add some disguises, right? That's more with your safeties. But again, for the most part, right, you can still run man and zone and still give these guys the flexibility to kind of play themselves without putting guys, to me, in bad positions consistently.
By the way, I want to let people know later today, Miami is going to have press conference with the new defensive assistant, Will Harris, who, despite the grown man named Silk claiming he was going to leave Miami before ever coaching here, Will Harris is a Miami Hurricane safeties coach. He's going to be speaking today. Zach Etheridge, the cornerbacks coach, and Damian Lewis, Miami alum, now coaching the defensive tackles. They will be introduced to the media later on today. We'll have reactions to that either today or tomorrow. And I want to give Malik Rosier the floor here. Malik, who is an awesome quarterbacks coach for Quarterback Country Tampa. And you were telling me you're also helping organize some 7-on-7s and 5-on-5 events coming up later this year. So let people know what you're working on, Malik.
Yeah, so during the summertime, we're going to do it on the weekends. We're hosting like a 2-day camp. So day 1 is just, simple skill drills. I feel like sometimes, guys know what skill drills are, but to me, until, you've done them, repeated them, right, kind of understand, hey, this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm not, you don't really know exactly what to work on, right? Some guys, the first time they've ever done kind of the combine/skill drill stuff is at a college camp, right? And to me, that's something that you should be kind of introduced to. So by the time you go to a college camp, you're comfortable with it, you at least understand what you should be expected to do. So it's a 2-day camp. Day 1, we'll go through a simple combine, right? We'll kind of let the guys understand, hey, this is what we're doing. This is why. This is how it helps your position, right? Day 2, it's a 5-on-5, 7-on-7. It will be $60 a kid. And the way we're targeting is doing a high school base, right? So like we're trying to get like St. Thomas. I know I'm talking to Cam Harris. That's at Coral City. He's at Carroll City. Right, I want to get the high school teams to actually come out. So day 1 will be the skill event. Day 2 will be more of a 7-on-7, 5-on-5. Again, like I said, it's $60, but we are doing a $5,000 cash prize. We will have vendors. I know I'm even working with some NIL athletes. I'm trying to get, guys like Travis Homer and David Njoku to come out and speak to the guys if they're in town before they, go back to the NFL. So I'm trying to do almost like a community event. So we're working on either Mullins Park or West Palm for kind of the East Coast. We have a location in Naples for kind of the Southwest. We also going to have one in Plant City, which is kind of Central Florida. And then I'm working on Tallahassee, which would be North Florida. So right now we're keeping it in Florida. But we think it'll be a really, really cool event for a lot of the high schools. Again, I know the kids here love the 7-on-7 travel. Right, at the end of the day, when your college coach comes to watch you, he's probably coming to watch you with your high school team. Right, your high school quarterback's throwing to you if you're a receiver. Right, so kind of building that chemistry. Right, so it kind of goes into the season and also gives some of the coaches kind of be able to say, hey, kind of what do we have? Right, because again, during the summertime is when a lot of the freshman group kind of comes in for these high school teams. Right, so again, it allows us to say, hey, what freshmen can play, what freshmen can't. Right, so you kind of get that early, at least gauge of like who can play before the season starts. So we think a lot of the high school coaches will kind of want to be involved. I know last year we had a good engagement. We did it last minute, and in 3 weeks got like 14 teams, right? So now we have about 3 or 4 months to kind of plan it out. So again, if you're a high school coach, you know a high school coach in the Florida area that wants to come compete in our camp, we will have video. I even have my own personal drone now, so there'll be drone footage, right? Well, you guys will get some really cool footage from us. So again, if you know a high school coach or some high school players that want to be involved, please follow me on Twitter. I think it's Malik Rosier 12. And if you'll just shoot me a DM, hey, I got this coach or this guy that wants to join, we can definitely network and talk about it.
I love it. Huge shout out to Malik Rosier, all the great work he's doing. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Make sure you're also checking out Locked On College Basketball. Andy Patton and Isaac Shade, they're going to have you ready for the postseason. I know Miami won't be ready for the postseason. Baseball team's doing well right now. Basketball team not as much, but Andy Patton. Yeah, that's right. We will keep you guys updated on all that. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow. We're going to have the recruiting overlord, Brian Smith, with us on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.